Good afternoon, Professor. My name is Valeria Garcia, and today I will be presenting on a topic that sits in absolute intersection of environmental science, urban design, and sociology. Let me introduce you sustainable urban transportation systems, the pathways to resilient and equitable mobility. To get more warm in the topic, transportation is considered frequently described as the lifeblood of modern civilization, the physical connective tissue that links human beings to labor markets, healthcare, education, and community. However, our inherited 20th century models of movement are facing an unprecedented structural crisis. Over the next minutes, we will show why a radical paradigm shift in global mobility is an absolute ecological and social necessity. We will inspect three distinct global cases: Stockholm, Portland, and Freiburg in Germany, to analyze the precise planning mechanisms and political strategies required to successfully decouple a city's prosperity from its dependence on the private automobile. To appreciate the urgency of sustainable transportation, we have to first diagnose a structural illness plaguing our contemporary cities. Following the Second World War, urban areas across the globe, particularly in North America, abandoned traditional compact grid systems in favor for an experimental design philosophy focused entirely on maximizing automobile throughput. This design choice created the phenomenon that planners refer to as automobile dependence. It operates as a damaging self-reinforcing feedback loop. Low density suburban housing makes driving an absolute prerequisite for basic survival. This surge in vehicle volume triggers severe gridlock, which municipalities traditionally try to solve by expanding freeways. However, due to economic law of induced demand, building more lanes simply attracts more cars, fueling further suburban sprawl and deeper car reliance. As masterfully articulated by Skiller and Kenworthy, when a society systematically prioritizes asphalt over human scale architecture, it traps itself in a compounding crisis. This crisis manifests daily in our lives through hours of lost economic productivity, stuck in gridlock, severe localized air pollution, and the systematic fragmentation of natural ecosystems. This brings us to the core question: why sustainable transportation systems so critically important? Why can we not simply maintain the status quo? We can categorize the absolute necessity for a mobility transition into three core pillars: environmental, economic, and social equity. Firstly, consider decarbonization. In his foundational research, Professor Jeff Kenworthy in 2006 documented that the global transport sectors accounts for nearly 25% of all energy-related greenhouse gas emissions, with private passengers' cars acting as the primary culprit. If we are to have any realistic change or chance of mitigating the catastrophic impacts of climate change, transitioning away from internal combustion engines toward active and mass transit is non negotiable. Second is public health. It is not just about global climate targets, it is about the air we breathe right now. Particulate matter from tailpipes correlates directly with elevated rates of childhood asthma, cardiovascular disease, and cognitive decline in urban centers. Furthermore, car-centric designs discourage daily physical activity, contributing heavily to sedentary lifestyle epidemics. Last but not least, the social equity, as urban theorists like Severo back in 1998 points out, in the transit metropolis as A city engineered exclusively for cars is inherently unequal. It systematically disenfranchises those who cannot afford a vehicle, the elderly, youth, and individuals with disabilities. Through sustainable mobility guarantees access to opportunity as a universal right, not an expensive privilege. Let's move forward to our first global exemplar, Stockholm, Sweden. Stockholm is universally recognized by urban historians as a premier pioneer of transit oriented development, or also known as TOD. Stockholm's journey began mid century in the 1950s. While American cities were busy bulldozing historic downtowns to build inner city freeways, Stockholm municipal planners chose radically different path. They coordinated their regional land use zoning directly with the expansion of their modern rapid transit rail network, the Tunnelbana. Apologize if there's any mispronunciation. Instead of allowing haphazard suburban sprawl to eat up to their surroundings' natural landscape, they design a finger plan. So, in other words, they built high density mixed use satellite towns such as Vällingby and Kista directly structured around the metro stations. This meant that high density housing, retail, and civic spaces were clustered within a effortlessly 5-minute walking radius of a high speed rail platform. By making rail transit the most convenient, immediate option from the moment a citizen steps outside of the door, Stockholm successfully built a high transit culture from the ground up. Stockholm's modern achievements prove that their foundational urban structure allows for incredibly bold climate policy. In 2006, the city launched a highly controversial trial, a congestion pricing tax system. Every time a private vehicle crossed into the inner city center during peak hours, the driver was automatically charged a variable fee. The empirical data collected by the Swedish economist Jonas Eliasson and his colleagues back in 2009 revealed that this policy was staggering success. Almost overnight, the traffic delays dropped by roughly 30% and greenhouse gas emissions within the inner city zone plummeted by 22%. But the real genius of Stockholm's model lies in its fiscal design. By legal mandate, 100% of the revenues generated from the congestion tax are funneled right back into expanding and upgrading the public transit system. This created a virtuous cycle of funding. Today, Stockholm's transit system is not only robust, but as of in 2017, every single bus and commuter train in the entire metropolitan fleet operates on 100% renewable energy. Moving forward to our second case study brings us back to the United States, proving that the sustainable transit models can thrive even within a deeply ingrained car culture. Going to the northwest of our country, Portland, Oregon is a legendary example of what planners call the freeway revolt. In the early 1970s, federal highways engineers finalized plans to construct the Mount Hood Freeway, which it was a massive concrete artery that would have sliced through historic vibrant neighborhoods in southeast Portland. Rather than accepting this as inevitable progress, a powerful coalition of local grassroots activists, neighborhood associations, and forward thinking politicians revolted. They successfully sued to halt the project. In a historic legal precedent, Portland convinced the federal government to let them take the millions of dollars designated for that highway and instead invest it into building a surface-level light rail transit system, also known today as the MAX lines. As documented by Newen and Kenworthy in 1999 in Sustainability and Cities, this single act of political defiance fundamentally rewrote the destiny of the entire metropolitan region, showing the world that highway expansion is a policy choice and not an inevitability. Portland understood that building a light rail train is meaningless if you continue to allow low density sprawl at the edge of the city. Therefore, in 1979, they paired their transit network with a revolutionary land use tool, a legally binding urban growth boundary, also known as UGB. This boundary draws a literal line in the sand around the metropolitan region. Outside the line, agricultural land and forests are strictly protected from development. Inside the line, developers are heavily incentivized to build high-density mixed-use infill projects. Fast forward today, Portland operationalizes this via their 20-minute neighborhood planning framework. The explicit goal is to configure urban density so that 90% of urban residents can access all essential daily needs, such as fresh groceries, primary schools, parks, and clinics, without ever needing to turn the key of a car. By capping downtown parking spaces, widening sidewalks, and building an extensive grid of bicycle paths, Portland successfully transformed its downtown from a sterile corporate parking lot into a thriving human-scale ecosystem. Our third and last final case study takes us to the historic city of Freiburg, Germany, widely celebrated as the ecological capital of Europe. During the post-war economic boom, cities across Europe were actively tearing down their old electric streetcar tracks to make a room for the modern influx of private automobiles. Freiburg, on the other hand, resisted this trend. They chose to preserve, aggressively modernize, and expand their traditional tramway network, ensuring it remained the fastest, most efficient transport spine in the region. Freiburg's crowning achievement in modern sustainable planning is the internationally renowned Vauban district, developed in the late 1990s. On a former military base, Vauban was designed with an explicit mission to create a highly dense, vibrant urban neighborhood where human beings take absolute precedence over the private automobile. The operational mechanics of the Vauban are fascinating and are through detailed by urban researcher Stephen Melia back in 2006. The street enforces a strict parking-free residential model. You are legally permitted to own a car, but you're absolutely forbidden from parking it on the street outside your home or in a private driveway. Instead, car owners are required to buy a highly tax expensive parking space in a massive solar paneled communal garage located exclusively at the absolute outer edge of the neighborhood. This design creates a profound psychological shift. If a resident wants to drive their car to buy a loaf of bread, they first have to walk 10 minutes to the edge of the district just to fetch their vehicle. Suddenly, walking, cycling, or stepping into the high-frequency tram line running directly through the center of the neighborhood becomes the path of least resistance. As a direct consequence of the intentional design friction, over 70% of households in Vauban choose to live completely car-free. This absence of moving traffic has allowed streets to be transformed into safe public living rooms, where children can play freely and neighbors gather dramatically, boosting localized social capital. To tie these narrative case studies into a rigorous empirical framework, let us examine this comparative data compiled by Jeff Genworthy in 2009, evaluating private vehicle ownership per 1,000 residents. The contrast is stark. A typical auto-centric North American metropolitan area averages 640 cars per 1,000 people. When we look at our case studies, we see the undeniable impact of deliberate structural intervention. Portland's growth boundary and light rail investments have suppressed their number slightly below the national average to 618. Stockholm's decades of strict transit-oriented development keep their ownership rate down to a modest 475. But look closely at Freiburg. Despite being situated in Germany, a wealthy industrialized nation famous for its global automotive culture, they integrated transit networking, dense land use, and car-free zoning kept vehicle ownership down just up to 413 cars per 1,000 residents. This data provides undeniable mathematical proof that when cities build reliable, dense, and dignified transit alternatives, citizens will willingly and happily decouple their lifestyles from automobile ownership. Moving forward to our conclusion, let us distill the profound lessons that we can extract from these global exemplars. First of all and foremost, sustainable transportation is fundamentally not a technological challenge. It is more an integrated planning challenge. Simply swapping out millions of gasoline cars for electric cars does absolutely nothing to alleviate traffic congestion, reduce infrastructure costs, or stop suburban sprawl. The true sustainability occurs only when land use, zoning, and transit networks are designed as a single symbiotic ecosystem. Secondly, it requires profound political courage. The canceled highways of Portland, the congestion pricing fees of Stockholm, and the peripheral parking garages of Freiburg all face massive initial public pushback. Progress requires leaders who are willing to prioritize long-term ecological resilience and public health over short-term automobile convenience. Last but not least, that re-engineering our cities for sustainable mobility is not only about restricting our freedom or punishing drivers. Rather, it is about liberating our urban spaces, expanding human choice, and reclaiming our cities for people rather than cars. Thank you for your attention, and I am looking forward for any questions or feedback. I will leave you the references here, and I hope you have an amazing week. Bye.